The day Brightwell Enterprises began its collapse was not due to a scandal, not due to an insider, not due to hackers, but simply because a woman walked into the lobby. Evelyn Carter, the 58-year-old black CEO of the $9.2 billion cybersecurity conglomerate, dressed in a gray cashmere sweater, wearing a PC Felipe watch, Italian leather shoes, with no logos, no assistant, and no fanfare, just the quiet confidence of someone who has reached the top and needs no one to validate it. Ashley Monroe, the receptionist, glanced at her skin color, then at her unremarkable outfit, and said, "Deliveries go through the back." Her words barely finished when security guards stepped forward, grabbing her arm. Mark Reynolds, Brightwell's vice president, stood a few meters away, recognized Evelyn immediately but did nothing, made no move, allowing the humiliation to unfold right in the middle of the lobby. As Evelyn was escorted out of the building, her face remained unchanged, but inside, a response began. Sharp, orderly, and irreversible. By the afternoon, Brightwell's stock began to plummet, and by the end of the month, the company would no longer exist. Evelyn Carter did not believe in revenge. She believed in consequences. It was a Monday morning in downtown New York. The air was fresh after a light rain, and the facade of Brightwell Enterprises, one of the most rapidly rising cybersecurity firms in America, glistened under the sun. Employees filtered through the revolving glass doors, sharply dressed in suits, ties carefully knotted, leather shoes clicking crisply on the polished marble floor. Evelyn Carter stood across the street observing. The 58-year-old woman with a tall, slender frame, her curly hair neatly styled, her face calm and composed. No one in the bustling crowd knew that she was the CEO and founder of Carter Innovations, a tech empire worth over $9.2 billion, specializing in cybersecurity, artificial intelligence, and technology integration within government organizations. Today, she was not here to make an announcement, to sign a deal, or to give a speech. She was here for a simple purpose, to see how Brightwell treats those they don't know. This is how Evelyn evaluates a partner. Not through slides, but through how they treat people. No badge, no entourage, no flashy designer clothes. Evelyn wore a simple gray cashmere sweater, dark pants, logo-less Italian leather shoes, and on her wrist, a classic PC Felipe watch, a symbol of quiet success. Every detail was carefully chosen to ensure she didn't attract attention, but to anyone who understood, each item exuded an understated level of class that needed no boasting. She crossed the street. Sunlight filtered through the towering buildings, casting a slanting glow on her face. But as she entered the lobby, the atmosphere changed. Eyes darted away. A few quick glances, then quickly turned. No one smiled at her like they did the white men in suits who walked through before her. At the reception desk, the center of the large lobby, Ashley Monroe sat leisurely behind the sleek glass and steel counter. Her straight blonde hair, nails painted a deep red, her eyes glued to her phone screen, one hand swiping through Instagram, the other fiddling with her newly bought Tiffany's bracelet. Evelyn approached, her voice calm but firm. "Hello. I have an appointment with Mr. Richard Lawson at 9 a.m. Ashley didn't look up, simply waved her hand toward the back. "Deliveries go through the back. Left alley, next to the truck entrance." Evelyn paused for a second. Not because of shock. She had faced this many times before, but still, every time a part of her ached. Not from being dismissed, but because it still existed, lingering, unchanging. Before she could respond, two uniformed security guards stepped forward. One placed his hand on her arm. "Ma'am, this reception area is for those with appointments or badges. Please move to the delivery area." Evelyn gently pulled her arm back, but her expression remained calm. "Sorry, I'm not making a delivery," she replied. "I'm here to meet Mr. Richard Lawson as scheduled. Evelyn Carter. You can check, you'll find my name." Ashley finally looked up, not out of doubt but out of disdain. She looked Evelyn up and down, her lower lip curling slightly. "Carter? Evelyn Carter?" She snorted derisively. "Oh, that name sounds familiar. But Mr. Lawson doesn't have any appointment with someone by that name, and if he did, I'm sure you wouldn't be dressed like this." A cold wave swept through the lobby. A few employees stopped in their tracks. An intern nearby pulled out their phone, but before they could start recording, a colleague gently tapped their arm to signal them to avoid trouble. And then, from the executive elevator, Mark Reynolds stepped out. Navy suit, silk tie, leather shoes so polished they could reflect the light. He walked through the lobby as usual, his eyes scanning the area. His eyes stopped. He recognized Evelyn immediately. No mistake. Her face had been on countless magazine covers. Forbes, Bloomberg, Business Insider. But Mark did nothing. He paused for a few seconds, watching her being stopped by security. Then he turned and walked away. Not a word, no motion. Perhaps he had been waiting for this moment. Perhaps he found it satisfying to see the woman with more power than him being humiliated. Perhaps he thought, this is the moment for my plan with Nexus Tech to come true. Evelyn tilted her head slightly. She had seen Mark, and she saw him turn away. The insult wasn't in Ashley's words. It was in the silence of those who knew exactly who she was. And Evelyn Carter, who had spent her life building an empire where no one could decide her worth, simply nodded. No resistance, no argument. But her gaze was as cold as steel. Only one person in the lobby, Vanessa Lewis, standing on the mezzanine, looking down. She bit her lip, clenched her fist, and knew. Something had just begun. Vanessa Lewis stood there, motionless, as if time had frozen behind the thick glass of the mezzanine. She looked down into the lobby, where just minutes ago, a woman revered by the entire tech industry had been treated so badly it was almost unbelievable. Evelyn Carter, with her steady posture and calm gaze, had walked through the silence of an entire system pretending not to see. Vanessa was the only black technician left standing at Brightwell. She was no stranger to vacant stares, whispered comments behind her back, and meetings where her hard work was credited to her white male colleagues. But this morning, when she saw Evelyn being grabbed by security and pushed toward the revolving doors, something inside Vanessa nearly exploded. She almost ran down, almost screamed out, almost said, "That's Evelyn Carter." But then she stayed still. Just like all the times before, she chose silence. She had tried to survive in this environment by avoiding conflict, by being smart in the conventional sense. She knew that one wrong word at that moment, and she could lose everything. She knew that. And Evelyn knew it too. 30 minutes later, the footage from Brightwell's security cameras, captured from 4 different angles, began to spread. It started in the internal Slack group of the IT department. One engineer watched it, then shared it to the Monday morning chill group. From there, nothing could stop it. The video was just over 3 minutes long, but it was 3 minutes that exposed a reality Brightwell had been hiding for years. On the screen, Ashley Monroe is seen sitting behind the reception desk, her face cold and uninterested in the guest. Then she looks up, raises an eyebrow when she hears Evelyn Carter's name. She sneers and gestures toward the back of the building. No sound, but her face and lip movements were clear. Deliveries go through the back. Then the security guards appear. One places a hand on Evelyn's arm. Evelyn pulls back, but the guard grips harder and pushes her back. The entire lobby remains silent. No one intervenes. Then, the angle shifts. A shot from near the elevators. And there, Mark Reynolds, vice president of Brightwell, stands still. His eyes lock onto Evelyn's. A brief blink. Then, he turns away, shoves his hands into his pockets, his face as calm as if he had just seen a lost delivery man. When the video surfaced on Twitter, everything exploded. An anonymous account, reportedly an insider, posted the video with the caption, "They kicked Evelyn Carter out of the headquarters of the company that was trying to partner with her." In less than 10 minutes, the video had 50,000 views. An hour later, CNN and Bloomberg were both covering the story. 3 hours later, it was shared by 3 U.S. senators and a journalist from the Washington Post with the caption, "This is why we still need to talk about racism in tech." The image of Evelyn being pushed out of the lobby, slowed down, in close-up, appeared in every article, every newscast. A black woman, empty-handed, her calm gaze, treated like a troublemaker, in the gleaming lobby of a billion-dollar corporation. In Brightwell's executive meeting room, where they were supposed to prepare for Evelyn to sign the Memorandum of Understanding, Richard Lawson, the CEO, stared at the screen. The video played right in front of him. Each second, each expression, each silent look from Mark Reynolds, undeniable. Richard's hand trembled as he grabbed his phone, dialing Evelyn's number repeatedly. No one picked up. Meanwhile, in another small meeting room, Ashley Monroe and a few colleagues were laughing quietly, unaware of the storm brewing outside. A staff member knocked on the door, whispered something. Ashley stood up quickly and left. She was asked to go to HR. As soon as she left, an email was sent to the entire company. All senior management is required to attend an emergency meeting concerning the incident in the main lobby this morning. Elsewhere, more than 30 blocks away from the Brightwell building, Evelyn Carter sat in a minimalist office with a view of the park. On her desk was a tablet playing the video, the one where she was treated as invisible. She didn't frown, she didn't show anger. Only her gaze, deep and cold, as if even steel could melt under it. "Begin," she said to her assistant. And the world began to turn on a completely different axis. The phone in Richard Lawson's hand hit the table with a heavy thud, breaking the eerie silence of the 35th floor executive room. The screen still displayed a still frame from the video. Evelyn Carter standing at the reception desk. A security guard gripping her arm while Mark Reynolds walked by, seemingly oblivious. The entire senior leadership team of Brightwell sat around the oval table, the harsh white light from the ceiling casting an eerie glow on their faces, which were slowly turning pale. They had prepared for 2 months for today's signing. A $400 million partnership. A chance for Brightwell to escape the looming threat of a merger with competitor Nexus Tech and become a standalone powerhouse with pioneering cybersecurity technology. And then, Evelyn Carter did not show up. No notice, no email, no explanation. Until the door burst open. A media staffer, drenched in sweat, drained of all color, walked in, choking on their words. "Mr. Lawson." The woman Ashley kicked out of the lobby this morning was Evelyn Carter. In that moment, the air seemed to leave the room. Richard jumped to his feet, his chair tipping back, his gaze blank as though he had just heard about a plane crash. He ran out of the room, sprinting down the red-carpeted hallway, pressing the elevator button repeatedly like a madman. In the lobby, he looked around. No Evelyn. Only cold silence, and the bewildered looks of employees who had started to hear whispers of the news. Richard walked to the reception desk, slamming his hand down. "Where's Ashley?" "She's in HR, sir," one of the staff murmured. He stood still for a few seconds, then turned away. Back in the executive room, no one spoke. Mark Reynolds was pretending to read some documents, but everyone could see the beads of sweat forming at the back of his shirt collar. Christina Wells, the CFO, leaned toward him. "Mark, you were down in the lobby, right?" Mark didn't answer immediately. He carefully set down the stack of papers, looking up with a calm but forced demeanor. "I walked by, but I wasn't sure that was Evelyn. She didn't announce herself, and she was dressed like a delivery person." He exhaled lightly, trying to appear reasonable. We can't blame a receptionist for not recognizing a CEO who shows up unannounced. Christina frowned. "And what about you? You recognized her, right? You knew exactly who she was." Mark pursed his lips, then shrugged. "I couldn't be sure." "Honestly, she didn't look..." "Didn't look what, Mark?" Richard's voice cut through, sharp as a blade. "Didn't look like the white billionaire you imagined?" Mark froze. The entire room held its breath. Richard grabbed the remote on the table and pressed a button. The large screen behind them lit up, playing the leaked video. The scene of Evelyn being pushed out of the lobby, each frame sharp like evidence in court. And then came the pivotal moment. Mark Reynolds, walking by, seeing Evelyn, his eyes flickering in recognition, then turning away. No one spoke. Not even Mark could offer an excuse. Meanwhile, at a small cafe 3 blocks away from Brightwell's headquarters, a group of CNN reporters were watching the video on an iPad. The news was exploding across platforms. They had confirmed the woman in the video was indeed Evelyn Carter. Her biography was being dug up. Born in Detroit, a former NASA software engineer, founder of Carter Innovations from her mother's 2-bedroom apartment. She was the mind behind encryption technology that protected over 60% of the U.S. government's military data systems. And now, she was the victim of a blatant act of racism in the very heart of a company trying to partner with her. The first article was titled, "Black CEO Kicked Out of Future Partners Headquarters. That was Evelyn Carter." In less than 10 minutes, the article had been shared over 100,000 times. At Brightwell's headquarters, the legal team was scrambling to calculate emergency measures. Christina whispered to Richard, "Is there any way to save this?" Richard shook his head, his voice heavy with despair. "Carter's not the type to forgive easily. She doesn't speak much, but once she decides..." He looked up at the screen, where Evelyn stood silently in the video. No shouting, no retaliation, just cold eyes and a calmness that could kill. "She'll turn silence into action." Richard turned to Mark. "You knew who she was. You stayed silent. And now, watch as Brightwell crumbles because of a cold, silent nod." As the final frame of the video closed on the meeting room screen, Evelyn Carter calmly stepping through the revolving door with a terrifying tranquility, the entire room fell into a deathly silence, as though at a funeral. But elsewhere, silence was being wielded as a weapon, deadly and precise. Inside the sleek black Bentley, speeding down Wall Street, the heart of Manhattan's financial district, Evelyn Carter sat in the back, her posture straight, her gaze fixed ahead, but not truly focused on anything. She didn't need anger. She didn't need to cry. She didn't need noise. Because Evelyn had never reacted emotionally. She acted strategically. She picked up her phone and dialed a single number. When the person on the other end picked up, her voice was low and deliberate. "Jessica. Cancel all negotiations with Brightwell. No meeting, no apology letters, no negotiations." A brief pause. Evelyn loosened the strap of her PC Felipe watch, as if adjusting the rhythm of a battle. "And activate Plan Delta." No one knew the full details of that plan, except Evelyn and a few trusted allies. But anyone who had ever crossed paths with Carter Innovations knew, once Evelyn Carter made her move, she didn't just sever ties, she made her enemies disintegrate from the roots. On the mezzanine floor of Brightwell's headquarters, Vanessa Lewis had not left her post. She had just stepped away from the railing when her phone buzzed softly in her pocket. A message from an unknown number. Just one line. "I'm Evelyn Carter. You witnessed what happened, and you stayed silent because I understand the cost of a voice. Meet me at 8 a.m. tomorrow at the Emerson Hotel." Vanessa stopped in her tracks, standing still in the empty hallway. She read the message over and over, her heart pounding like a drum in her chest. Evelyn wasn't angry. She wasn't threatening. She was simply confirming one thing she had seen. And without saying a word, Evelyn knew why Vanessa had stayed silent. Vanessa had worked at Brightwell for 6 years. She was the only black person in mid-level management. She had been underestimated no less than 10 times, had her research stolen twice, and was almost fired just for not participating in the team's happy hour culture, a party full of people who didn't look like her. But she had survived, had endured, by learning how to stay silent to survive. And Evelyn Carter, with a brief glance this morning, had seen it all. Vanessa typed a simple response. "I will be there." Meanwhile, on the higher floors of Brightwell, Mark Reynolds had retreated to his private office. The door was shut, the curtains drawn. He powered on his personal laptop, not connected to the internal system, and began accessing an encrypted email address. He knew the plan had started. Evelyn wouldn't forgive, but he wasn't worried, at least not yet. Because Mark had planned ahead. If Carter Innovations pulled out, Nexus Tech, Carter's biggest rival, would take over Brightwell. And then Mark would be the one leading the transition, receiving the multi-million-dollar golden parachute. His fingers flew over the keyboard, sending a short message. "Eagle has left the nest. Plan B can be activated." Sent to James Harper, CEO of Nexus Tech. Mark leaned back, closing his eyes, thinking everything was still under control. But what he didn't know was, the moment he hit send, his email had been extracted by a hidden monitoring system deep within Brightwell's network, a program that Carter Innovations had installed 2 weeks prior in preparation for their partnership. The program had just sent the entire content to Evelyn Carter's private server. That afternoon, the headquarters of Carter Innovations was livelier than usual. The strategy room held an emergency meeting. The legal team was preparing new files. The PR department was drafting a press release with the embargo time scheduled down to the minute. Amidst this machinery, Evelyn Carter spoke very little. She only said one thing to the executive team. "This is not revenge. This is a lesson. They will understand. Respect is not a request. It is a condition for survival." No one objected, because everyone knew when Evelyn Carter used silence, it wasn't weakness. It was a form of power, sharp as a blade, silent as underground water, but strong enough to sink an empire. That evening, Vanessa Lewis sat at her desk in her small Brooklyn apartment, editing every word of her resume. She knew tomorrow's meeting would change everything. But for the first time in years, she didn't feel afraid. She only felt relief. Outside, social media was still buzzing. The hashtag #IStandWithEvelyn began trending. Other CEOs were speaking out. An article in the New York Times read, "Evelyn Carter doesn't need to shout, she just needs to look," and the whole system trembles. Social media continued to explode through the night. On Reddit, a thread titled, "Brightwell just blew a $400 million deal by being racist," topped the trending section. On LinkedIn, CEOs shared an article titled, why corporate culture is more important than any contract. And in private venture capital groups, one phrase was repeated over and over: Evelyn Carter has cut them off. In another world, the ground floor of Brightwell's headquarters, Ashley Monroe was still living in her own bubble of perception. She sat with one leg crossed behind the reception desk, holding a now cold latte, recounting the morning's events to a few colleagues on the afternoon shift. She gestured dramatically as if reenacting the scene where she kicked Evelyn out. Laughing, she emphasized, "She just stood there, acting like she was someone's boss. I made it clear, no appointment, go through the back, then I called security, and guess what? They threw her out." The group laughed, some of them pretending to enjoy the story, not because they thought it was funny, but because Ashley was still backed by Mark Reynolds. But the atmosphere changed abruptly when Jennifer, the afternoon receptionist, walked in, phone in hand, her face pale as if she had seen a ghost. She interrupted Ashley with what was almost a scream. "Do you know who she is?" "Evelyn Carter." The group went silent. Jennifer walked closer, her voice trembling with anger. "She's the CEO of Carter Innovations, the person Richard's been negotiating with for 6 months, the only one who could save this company from being swallowed by Nexus. And you just kicked her out like she was garbage." Ashley froze. Her face turned as white as paper. The first words that came out of her mouth weren't an apology, but an instinctive defense. "No way. It couldn't have been her. She didn't look—" She stuttered, her words faltering mid-sentence. Jennifer narrowed her eyes, her voice sharp as a knife. "Not look what, Ashley? Not look like a billionaire? Or not look like someone you think should be in this lobby?" The last words echoed loudly in the silent lobby, like a nail being driven into the coffin of a career. Upstairs, things were even worse. The executive team had just received an urgent email. Brightwell's stock had dropped 12% in 1 hour. 2 out of the 5 major investors had begun pulling out. Financial advisors were calling non-stop. A series of meetings had been canceled in just 30 minutes. Christina Wells, the CFO, walked into Richard's office, her eyes wide but failing to hide the panic. "A third bank just requested a review of our partnership files. It looks like they're going to cut off our credit limit in the next 24 hours. Richard put his head in his hands. He understood. This wasn't just a financial collapse. It was a chain reaction. When one investor pulls out, others will follow. When clients lose faith, all the reassurances in the world become meaningless. Richard whispered almost to himself, "Evelyn has made her decision. And she doesn't need to do anything else. Let the market do the rest." On the west wing of the building, Mark Reynolds was walking briskly toward his private office, trying to maintain a calm appearance. But inside, he felt every layer of the walls around him crashing down. The plan with Nexus Tech, the golden parachute, the chance to become CEO in the merger deal. Everything suddenly seemed unstable. As he passed the reception desk, he heard Jennifer's voice. "This is why someone like Evelyn Carter doesn't need to shout, because the truth will ring out like a death knell." Mark stopped in his tracks. For a moment, his eyes met Jennifer's, cold, filled with disdain. He turned away, but that brief glance made his shoulders slump lower as he continued walking. Meanwhile, 2 blocks away, in a small office, Evelyn Carter sat alone with a tablet. On the screen was the stock chart for Brightwell, red like blood flowing. Her assistant entered. "The press release is ready, ma'am. If you approve, we can release it at exactly 9 a.m. tomorrow." Evelyn nodded, her eyes still fixed on the chart. "Send it out," she said, "but don't push. We don't need to push. Just let them slip." In Brightwell's employee break room, Ashley sat alone. Her eyes were glued to her phone screen, where the video was playing for the 10th time. The image of her, sneering and pointing to the back door, had now become a symbol of something America's corporate world doesn't dare admit, but always carries. Subtle racism, silent prejudice, and petty power. A message from her mother had just arrived. "Sweetie, I saw you on the news. What's going on? They're saying you offended someone very important." Ashley put the phone down, her hands trembling. She had never imagined that, on an ordinary day, a single, arrogant remark would become the fatal shot that would end a career, and perhaps an entire company. The air in Brightwell's grand lobby was so thick it felt like it could be cut with a knife. Conversations gradually quieted. All eyes turned to one point. Richard Lawson, the CEO of the company, was striding like a storm toward the reception desk. Ashley Monroe, who had just stood up from her chair, still shaken by Jennifer's warning, didn't even have time to finish a thought before Richard was standing right in front of her, his voice sharp as metal striking glass. "What did you do to Evelyn Carter?" The question rang like an alarm bell throughout the lobby, causing not just the employees but the security guards, other receptionists, and visitors to hold their breath. Ashley opened her mouth, but no sound came out. Her eyelids fluttered. Her throat was dry. Richard didn't wait for an answer. He slammed both his hands on the desk. "Do you know who she is? Evelyn Carter, the founder of Carter Innovations, the person we've been negotiating a $400 million strategic partnership with. The one who could save this company from collapse, and you threw her out like a janitor?" Ashley stepped back, bumping into the wall behind her, her eyes wide, her mouth moving, but no words coming out. "But she didn't look like—" "Didn't look like what?" Richard yelled. "Not like who? Not like someone you think deserves to walk through that door?" His last words landed like a hammer blow. Ashley lowered her head, tears welling up, but there was no defense, no justification. There was nothing to justify. On the 35th floor, Mark Reynolds sat in his private office, his hands hurriedly gliding over the keyboard. The screen displayed an encrypted inbox using a personal address, accessed through a private network. He was deleting message after message. Exchanges with James Harper, the CEO of Nexus Tech, over the past 2 months. These emails not only revealed Mark's dissatisfaction with the Carter deal, but also contained internal details about negotiation strategies, secret clauses, and Brightwell's legal weaknesses. Things that should never have leaked. Mark smirked to himself, muttering, "As long as no one finds out, there's still an escape route." But what he didn't know was, Carter Innovations' security system had quietly installed a tracking code in the preliminary NDA contract Mark had downloaded. Every letter he typed, every email he opened, had been sent in parallel to a hidden server. When Mark hit delete all and leaned back in his chair, satisfied, across the city, Evelyn Carter received a notification with the title, "Mark Reynolds, Breach of Trust Detected. Data package received." She showed no emotion. She simply closed the laptop and said to the legal advisor standing beside her, "Prepare the file for the SEC and send a copy to Richard Lawson." In the grand lobby below, Richard turned away after unloading his anger on Ashley. He no longer cared about her tears. He no longer cared about the furtive glances from the employees around him. All he could see was the heart of the company he had built for 20 years cracking, the cracks spreading like a spider's web. As he stepped into the elevator, his phone buzzed, an email from Carter Innovations. Subject: Partnership terminated, irreparable. Richard opened the email. The content was only 4 sentences. Brightwell Enterprises does not meet the ethical standards that Carter Innovations requires of any partner. All official and unofficial negotiations are immediately terminated. Any shared information is protected by legal terms and will not be reused. We wish your company the best in finding a suitable direction. No best regards. No opportunity to make amends. Just an ending, clean and cold. That evening, Ashley Monroe returned to her small apartment. She took a long shower, almost trying to wash away the filth that had clung to her skin all day. But nothing could erase that feeling. When she turned on the TV, her own face appeared on screen. The evening news was airing, replaying the security footage. Ashley's face, looking up, glancing down, sneering, then turning back to her desk as if she had just dealt with an annoying fly, was clear in the frame. The commentator spoke slowly. Ashley Monroe, a receptionist at Brightwell Enterprises, has become the target of criticism after she kicked CEO Carter out of the company's lobby with what has been described as discriminatory and unprofessional behavior. The incident was recorded from 4 security angles, and to date, no official statement has been made by Monroe herself. Ashley collapsed onto the floor. She knew she was no longer just a person. She had become the name forever tied to the biggest failure in Brightwell's history, a red mark that would follow her for the rest of her career. Meanwhile, Vanessa Lewis was preparing her file for tomorrow's meeting. She was reprinting an old report, revising the presentation on the AI system she had developed but had once had stolen by her former boss. This time, she knew she would be heard. She looked in the mirror, seeing her gaze steadier than ever before. Because she knew. Evelyn had seen, and Evelyn had chosen her. The next morning, when Richard walked into the emergency board meeting, the large screen displayed Brightwell's stock chart, continuing its freefall. Beneath the chart was a headline from Forbes. Carter Innovations officially cuts ties with Brightwell, a lesson in arrogance and silent contempt. There was no sound in the room, only the sound of collapse spreading in each tile on the floor, like the heart of an entire company breaking. Inside Brightwell's executive meeting room, the light from the large screen reflected off the faces that were slowly losing their color. The stock chart, blood red, took up half the screen, while the other half displayed a headline from Forbes, hitting like a final blow. Carter, Innovations officially ends all negotiations with Brightwell, a lesson in arrogance and blindness in corporate culture. But that was only the beginning. Less than 20 minutes after the meeting started, Christina Wells, the CFO, received an urgent email, the subject line clear. Notification from Carter Innovations Legal Department. Criminal complaint filed with the U.S. Department of Justice. Subject, Ashley Monroe. Richard Lawson flinched when he heard Christina read aloud the contents. Ashley Monroe, receptionist at Brightwell Enterprises, is accused of 3 offenses. 1. Intentional racial discrimination in a corporate environment. 2. Assault, the act of grabbing and pulling the arm of an unconsenting individual. 3. Obstructing commercial cooperation between 2 legal entities under Clause 4.7, Federal Trade Law. The room fell silent. A few people exchanged glances, others lowered their heads. Richard pressed his hand to his forehead, speechless. He knew. Evelyn wasn't just leaving. She was dismantling Brightwell from the inside out, layer by layer, individual by individual. In another development, that same morning, another email was sent from Carter Innovations' inbox, spreading to thousands of addresses in the tech world, including CEOs, investment funds, and legal advisors of nearly 30 Fortune 500 companies. Carter Innovations officially ends all negotiations with Brightwell Enterprises on ethical grounds. The incident on the 12th of this month has seriously violated our principles of collaboration. Below is evidence taken from our surveillance system recording discriminatory, violent, and disrespectful behavior in the workplace. Attached was a link. A 3-minute video with no commentary, no background music. Just raw truth recorded from 4 angles. A high-angle shot capturing the entire lobby. Evelyn Carter standing in front of the reception desk, her arm being held by a security guard. A close-up shot, Ashley raising her eyebrows, sneering, mouthing something that, even without sound, was enough for all of America to guess. A shot from behind Evelyn, capturing the moment Mark Reynolds stepped out of the elevator, his eyes pausing, then turning away. And finally, a close-up from the mezzanine, where Vanessa Lewis stood, fists clenched, her eyes torn between courage and fear. In just 2 hours, the video had exceeded 8 million views. Social media platforms like LinkedIn, Twitter, Reddit, and YouTube were flooded with comments, outrage, and analysis. On TechCrunch, an expert commented, "The seismic shift Evelyn Carter has caused is not merely retaliation. She's set a new standard in how the tech industry responds to toxic cultures and systemic racism." In the HR office, Ashley Monroe was asked to return her access card, computer, and sign the suspension notice. When she read the line "salary suspension during the investigation," she screamed, "No, this is a mistake. I was just doing my job." But the HR staff said nothing. They exchanged looks and continued reading the emergency procedure. Ashley threw the file down on the desk, then collapsed into the chair. She couldn't understand how the world had crumbled so fast, within less than 48 hours. One of the HR team members, who had been made to run errands by Ashley countless times without thanks, softly said, "No one taught you the difference between right and wrong. But Evelyn Carter will teach you by making the entire nation see." On the 35th floor, Mark Reynolds had just received an email with the subject, "Notice: Internal account temporarily suspended for internal investigation." Immediately after, his computer screen locked. A message appeared. "Please wait for legal staff to contact you. Access has been disabled under Level 3 security terms." Mark exhaled sharply, his hand clenched. He knew. Evelyn didn't just want Brightwell to lose a partner. She was rooting out those who had created that toxic culture. And he was on the top of the list. That morning, at the Emerson Hotel, Vanessa Lewis entered the ground-floor restaurant, which had been reserved the day before. In the luxurious, quiet space, the soft golden lights, Evelyn Carter was already seated. On the table was just a cup of tea and an empty seat waiting for her. Vanessa sat down, her heart still pounding in her chest, but her gaze steadier than ever before. Evelyn looked at her, not smiling, but her eyes warm. "You didn't say anything," Evelyn began, her voice slow and deep. "But you looked. And I know you understand what's happening." Vanessa nodded slightly. "I was scared, but I regret staying silent." Evelyn tilted her head slightly. "Silence is not failure, only when we let it define us forever." She pushed a leather folder toward Vanessa. Inside was an invitation. Position: Director of Artificial Intelligence Security Programs, Carter Innovations. Vanessa couldn't believe it. She looked at Evelyn. "You don't have to prove anything," Evelyn said. "You just need to build a place where people like us never have to bow our heads again." The announcement was sent out precisely at 10 a.m. that morning from Brightwell's internal system. The subject line was brief: Disciplinary action notification. Suspension and termination of employment for Ashley Monroe. Just below, the content clearly listed violations of internal conduct policies, severely affecting the company's reputation and strategic partnerships, causing significant damage to image, finances, and personnel. There was no compensation clause, no legal support, not a single reference letter. Ashley Monroe, who had once held her head high behind the reception desk, was now the first name on the public list of those removed in the crisis, known as Brightwell Evelyn Carter. Shortly after, another email was sent from Carter Innovations' legal office with a clear subject. Lawsuit notice. Subject: Ashley Monroe, civil liability. The content included 3 charges: intentional racial and age-based discrimination, violating the Workplace Anti-Discrimination Clause under federal law. Minor physical assault, evidenced by the act of grabbing and pulling someone against their will and unnecessarily, causing harm to their dignity and personal honor. Obstruction of commercial cooperation and causing quantifiable financial damage, estimated to be around $2 million. Attached was a video excerpt, witness testimony, and an offer. One that couldn't be refused. Have your lawyer contact us within 72 hours for a settlement, or the lawsuit will officially be filed in federal court. Ashley Monroe sat in her small apartment in Queens, the curtains drawn tight, her phone silent after hours of being bombarded by messages, emails, and threats from social media. Those who once liked her beach photos, selfies at work, now turned their backs without mercy. She had emptied her bank account to pay for a temporary lawyer, but he just shook his head after reading the lawsuit from Carter Innovations. You understand this is a landmark case, right? They don't want to settle. They want to make a point. And you're the first one. Ashley's hands trembled. On the table, her phone screen lit up with a notification. Official lawsuit notice sent to your inbox. The white text on the red background seemed to explode before her eyes. She buried her face in her pillow, her whole body curling up in a panic. From a receptionist with a little power and an illusion of control, she was now facing a harsh truth. A raised eyebrow, an ill-considered word, and she would pay the price for the rest of her life. Meanwhile, within Brightwell, 2 security officers involved in the incident were immediately placed under investigation. One was temporarily suspended, while the other was reassigned from the reception area. Although they were not directly sued, both faced intense internal backlash from HR and the union. In the internal investigation report, the action of gripping a guest's arm and forcing them to move when their identity was unclear was deemed abuse of power and gross cultural insensitivity. In a closed-door meeting between the security team, senior management sighed. We underestimated a woman just because she wasn't with an assistant and didn't wear a badge. That's deep-seated prejudice, not a technical error. The collapse was no longer just about numbers. It had begun to seep into the very ethical structure of the organization. Whispers started to spread around the office. Who's next? What about Mark Reynolds? How many internal emails are Evelyn keeping as evidence? In the top-floor executive office, Richard Lawson sat, looking out over the city in the distance. But instead of the proud towers of Manhattan, he only saw his own reflection blurred on the glass. His secretary entered and placed a new document on his desk, the resignation letters of 3 regional directors. Beneath it was a marked file labeled Urgent SEC requires cooperation on suspicious transactions. At the same time, on his computer screen, a fresh article had just been published on the Wall Street Journal. Evelyn Carter files her first personal lawsuit. Brightwell is no longer just a company in crisis. It is becoming a symbol of an era's failure in corporate culture. Richard closed his eyes. He knew. The first to fall wasn't Ashley. It was the pride of an entire system, shattered by Evelyn Carter's silent gaze. The news about the first personal lawsuit filed against Ashley Monroe was still fresh in the noon broadcasts when a second, even more seismic wave was about to hit. But this time, the target was not a receptionist, but one of Brightwell's most powerful pillars. On the 35th floor, Richard Lawson had just set his coffee cup down when his personal assistant walked in, her face ashen. "You need to see this immediately." She handed him a printed file from the internal system. At the top of each page, the red stamp from the U.S. Securities and Exchange Commission (SEC) was clearly visible. Richard flipped to the first page. The headline read like a knife's edge: "Preliminary investigation opened on Mark Reynolds, suspected of corporate espionage, abuse of power, and investor fraud." He looked up. "Is this real?" The assistant nodded, swallowing hard. Evelyn Carter just sent the entire data set to the SEC, including all emails, transaction histories, and virtual meeting logs. Everything proves Mark has been secretly negotiating with Nexus Tech while negotiating with Carter. A few hours earlier, in Carter Innovations headquarters, a closed-door meeting was underway. Evelyn sat at the head of the table, facing legal representatives and policy advisors. On the screen was a series of decrypted emails, arranged chronologically, all sent from Mark Reynolds' personal email to James Harper, CEO of Nexus Tech. One email mentioning a plan to obstruct the deal with Carter. One email discussing merger valuation if Carter pulls out. An attachment containing a summary of Brightwell's internal financial structure, data that had never been made public. Evelyn spoke very little. She simply nodded once and signed the document. Approve sending all data to the SEC under the Market Integrity Whistleblower Act. And so, Mark Reynolds officially became the next target, not of the press, but of the law. Back at Brightwell headquarters, as CNN's special report aired, Mark was sitting in his office, lighting a small cigar, a habit he rewarded himself with whenever he felt he had the upper hand. But this time, the tide had turned. On the TV screen in the corner of the room, Evelyn's image appeared. Below, the ticker read, "Carter Innovations accuses senior leadership at Brightwell. Allegations of corporate espionage and market manipulation." Mark jumped to his feet, his face draining of color. He rushed to his computer, but it was too late. His email system was locked. His administrative access account had been deactivated. A notification popped up. "Account disabled by order of the board of directors. Awaiting urgent meeting." The desk phone rang. Richard Lawson was calling directly. "Mark," Richard's voice was cold as steel, "Evelyn has sent all your emails to the SEC." Mark held his breath. "You've betrayed this company. And I saw it in Evelyn's eyes that day, but I didn't want to believe it." "Richard, I can explain." "No. Save your explanation for the court." Richard hung up. That afternoon, the Brightwell Board of Directors held an emergency meeting that lasted 45 minutes, after which they announced, "Mr. Mark Reynolds has been suspended from all positions, pending an independent investigation into allegations of corporate espionage and violations of internal ethics." At the same time, the SEC issued a statement confirming the opening of a preliminary investigation, stating, "Based on data provided by a business partner, there is evidence suggesting Mr. Mark Reynolds, Vice President of Brightwell Enterprises, provided internal financial information to a third party, causing serious disruptions to market structure and unfair competition." On social media, the hashtag #Brightwell Trader began to trend. No longer was Ashley being criticized. Now, Mark Reynolds had become a symbol of betrayal exploitation, and corruption in the executive world. That evening, in his suburban apartment, Mark sat alone, no cigar burning in his hand. He opened his personal email, the only account he still had access to, and saw a new message. From Carter Innovations Legal Team. Subject, personal lawsuit. Charges, abuse of trust and sabotaging strategic partnership. He threw his phone down onto the floor, but it only made a small clink, not enough to drown out the sound of his heart breaking. In Carter Innovations' conference room, an assistant walked up to Evelyn Carter and handed her a printed article from Harvard Business Review. She skimmed it and nodded. On the cover of the magazine, the headline stood out, Evelyn Carter, When Silence Becomes Justice. After the revelation of Mark Reynolds' scandal, the investment world could no longer be patient. The silence from Brightwell's executive team was no longer a sign of calm. It was the signal of a sinking ship. In just 72 hours, Brightwell lost over 60% of its major corporate clients, including 3 national banks, 2 telecommunications financial groups, and a supermarket chain that was testing their security platform. The reasons provided by the clients were almost identical: loss of trust in Brightwell's ethics and internal controls. The final blow came on Tuesday morning, when the U.S. Defense Contract Management Agency officially announced the cancellation of the ongoing agreement with Brightwell Enterprises, citing uncontrollable security risks due to lax internal structure and the potential for data leakage from the executive team. Richard Lawson read the news through the internal email, paralyzed. That project accounted for 23% of the projected revenue for the next quarter. Not only had the company lost money, but it had also lost credibility at the highest level, the government. Once the government lost faith, no other business would dare proceed. Later that day, the National Securities Commission issued a Level 2 warning on Brightwell stock, temporarily placing its ticker BRWE on a tight watch list due to ongoing risks from negative publicity and price volatility. Investors were in panic. Sell-off orders flooded the system. In less than 4 hours of trading, Brightwell's stock dropped more than 40%, causing a temporary liquidity crisis for several investment funds. Christina Wells, the CFO, stood before the board, her face ashen, reporting, "If we don't secure a refinancing package within the next 48 hours, we will be delisted." No one in the room objected, not because they agreed, but because they saw the end. Outside Brightwell's headquarters, CNN, Bloomberg, and CNBC live broadcasting vans lined the block. The media had dubbed the event simply The Fall of Brightwell, a brutal copycat of the Enron scandal, but in the 4.0 era. On a live financial analysis show, the host spoke. What caused Brightwell's collapse wasn't just a personal mistake, but a series of errors stemming from a culture of arrogance and subtle discrimination that has been nurtured over the years. Evelyn Carter didn't create this storm. She simply held up a mirror to them. At Carter Innovations' office, when Evelyn was asked in a brief interview whether she regretted pushing a major company to the brink of bankruptcy, she simply answered, "I didn't destroy Brightwell. They destroyed themselves. I just stopped letting them hide it." Mark Reynolds received the delisting news while preparing his legal response to the SEC. He picked up the phone and dialed Richard automatically, then stopped midway. He knew no one would pick up. By now, Richard Lawson had been suspended, pending an investigation into his management responsibilities. The board of directors had met privately that morning and officially announced, CEO Richard Lawson will be temporarily suspended to facilitate an internal investigation and report to shareholders. The most powerful position at Brightwell was now just an empty chair in a cold room, where legal advisors moved in and out like funeral bearers. As for Ashley Monroe, the one who started it all, she sat huddled in her dark apartment. She hadn't dared step outside. The window was covered with newspaper, and the doorbell had been disconnected. That day, she received an official summons to court from Carter's law office. The compensation Evelyn demanded, $2 million, was not just a penalty, it was a message. That power no longer lay in position but in action, and every action, no matter how small, could result in the downfall of an empire. In the high-rise office of Carter Innovations, Vanessa Lewis had just signed her official contract to become the director of the AI program. Evelyn stood beside her, looking out over the New York City skyline. "Do you see it?" Evelyn said softly. "They're still blaming me." Vanessa smiled. "Because if they accept the truth, they'll have to face themselves." Evelyn nodded. Her gaze was no longer cold. It was something much clearer, the serenity of someone who had chosen the right path, even if it meant going through a storm. The morning light shone on the glass facade of what was once the proud symbol of Brightwell Enterprises. The stainless steel sign bearing the company's name had been removed, leaving a barren gap in the building's front. A few pedestrians stopped to look, whispering to each other. "We once thought it would be the national cybersecurity hub." No one expected that what was once the stage for a notorious racial discrimination incident would soon become the new heart of the city. Evelyn Carter did not choose retaliation with hostile declarations. There were no words about revenge, payback, or crushing. She simply issued a press release on Monday morning. Carter Innovations has officially acquired the former Brightwell headquarters for $1, along with a package to preserve essential staff. And a final statement with weight. The place that once shut its doors to me will now open for thousands of young people like me, those whom society once turned its back on. 3 weeks later, at an outdoor press conference right in front of the main entrance, Evelyn Carter appeared among reporters, investors, and local government representatives. A gentle breeze brushed through her elegant silver hair. She didn't stand on a high podium or use an elaborate microphone. She simply held a wireless mic, her voice clear. "Today, I'm not just buying a building. I'm reclaiming an icon, and I'm rewriting its definition." She turned slightly, pointing at the tower. The former Brightwell headquarters will no longer be a fortress for outdated privileges. From now on, this place will be known as the Cole Center for Innovation, a high-tech training center for young people of color, low-income students, and forgotten talents. The area erupted in applause, but Evelyn didn't stop. "We do not train employees, we create creators, engineers, inventors, future technology leaders. We do not place them into an outdated corporate culture. We help them create a new culture." That afternoon, Vanessa Lewis stood in front of the room that had once been Mark Reynolds' executive office. She placed her hand on the walnut doorframe, pausing for a long moment before entering. The brass plaque bearing Mark Reynolds, Executive VP, had been replaced with a finely laser-etched new inscription, Vanessa Lewis, National Director, Cole Center for Innovation. Inside, the space had been completely redesigned. The bulky ebony wood conference table was replaced with an open collaborative area. Partition walls had been removed, allowing light to flood the room. In the corner, there was a nationwide map of the branch system, starting with New York, followed by Atlanta, Oakland, Detroit, Baltimore. Vanessa pulled out the first training plan. It outlined a 6-month curriculum, an applied AI academy, a course on cybersecurity, automated response programming, and an internship program at Carter Innovations. She took out her phone, sending a brief message to Evelyn. "The tech team is ready. The first batch of students will start in 3 weeks." The reply came back with a single line. "Excellent." And this time, no one will be asked to go through the back door. In a live interview on Bloomberg TV, when asked why she chose the name Cole instead of Carter for the center, Evelyn smiled lightly. "That's my mother's surname. A black woman who couldn't read, but taught me that greatness doesn't come from titles. It comes from what we give to the next generation." The host paused for a second, then asked, "What do you think those who once offended you are thinking now when they see this?" Evelyn didn't answer immediately. She simply looked at the screen showing the grand opening of the Cole Center, where a group of high school students, all people of color, stood waiting for a tour, their eyes bright with hope. After a moment of silence, she said slowly, "Maybe they still think I'm just an old woman in a gray sweater. But now they'll have to admit, sometimes the ones most underestimated are the ones who rebuild an entire city." In a small corner of New York, Ashley Monroe watched the interview on an old laptop in the temporary room she was renting in Brooklyn. Her eyes were vacant. Behind her were boxes of job applications still unanswered, and a call center uniform hung quietly in the corner of the room. She turned off the screen. Outside, the city was changing, and she had missed the train of humanity, responsibility, and change. 1 year after the Brightwell lobby became the epicenter of public controversy, the 5 people tied to the events that unfolded had each taken irreversible paths. Each of them a different direction, like the final pieces of an ethical map that society was beginning to redraw. At 59, Evelyn Carter became the first black woman in U.S. history to receive the National Technology Achievement Award, an honor traditionally reserved for inventors recognized by the government in fields considered economic pillars. She took the stage in a simple gray blazer, the same color of the coat that had caused her to be ejected from Brightwell a year earlier. When invited to speak before Congress in a special hearing on ethics in recruitment and AI candidate screening systems, she didn't speak about herself. She spoke about the millions who are excluded at the application stage because they don't come from the right place, didn't go to the right school, or don't look the right way. The words she left echoed throughout the chamber. Remember, the person once considered invisible might be the one holding the key to your future. And for many, Evelyn Carter was no longer just a CEO. She was a living principle, written with endurance and intelligence. Vanessa Lewis, who once clenched her fists in the mezzanine due to helplessness, now managed 3 branches of the Cole Center for Innovation in New York, Atlanta, and Oakland. Each location, each classroom was a tech playground for young people who had never been exposed to professional programming spaces. She had not only become a new role model for black female leadership in the tech industry, but also contributed to redesigning the ethics curriculum for AI, where systems are not just looking for the right candidates, but are also programmed to avoid repeating historical biases. At a TEDx talk at Stanford, Vanessa once said, "We don't want our kids to learn how to survive in this world. We want them to rebuild the world so they don't have to survive anymore." Richard Lawson, the former CEO of Brightwell, now lived quietly in a vacation home in the Colorado pine forests. For the past year, he had never been asked for advice even once. His name no longer appeared on the tech leadership rankings like it used to. People who were once his friends now answered emails with, "Sorry, my schedule is full for the next month." He spent most of his time tending the garden, reading, and occasionally staring at the framed photo in the living room. The photo of him shaking Evelyn Carter's hand during a closed meeting years ago when she was still a chief engineer. Unknown, without influence, but with a gaze that, even back then, was the gaze of someone who knew exactly where they were headed. Some said Richard had finished writing a memoir titled "Silence Comes with a Price." But to this day, no publisher had agreed to print it. Mark Reynolds, once the second most powerful figure at Brightwell, went to court in a closed trial due to the sensitive nature of the leaked documents. The trial lasted 6 months and ended with the verdict. Charges: corporate espionage, market manipulation, and abuse of executive position for personal gain. Sentence: 5 years of federal prison, with no parole for the first 3 years. His reputation was shattered. All assets under the company's name were seized to cover subsequent civil lawsuits. His wife filed for divorce while waiting for the verdict. His children did not attend the trial. A few days after the verdict, a reporter snapped a photo of Mark being escorted into a prison van, dressed in an orange jumpsuit. He bowed his head not out of remorse, but because there was nothing left to lift. Ashley Monroe, who once sat behind the reception desk with a sneer, now worked the night shift at a small customer service center in the suburbs, earning $14.50 per hour, with no benefits, no opportunities for advancement. She lived in a shared apartment with 2 strangers, walking 40 minutes every day to the train station for her shift. Her LinkedIn profile had been deleted by thousands of negative reviews. Every time she applied for a new job, recruiters only needed to type Ashley Monroe plus Carter to reject her without even reading her resume. Occasionally, when there were no customer calls, Ashley would secretly pull up her phone and rewatch the video of herself from the security cameras that day. She'd slowly scroll to the part where she sneered, saying, "This is not a social services center." She used to think it was a joke, but now she realized it was fate, a fate that she had spoken into existence herself. 5 people, 5 destinies, and at the center of them was a single moment that once unfolded in the marble-clad lobby. A look of contempt, a silent frown, a handshake that never came, a hand being brushed aside, a dream being crushed, and then rewritten by the very hand of the person once considered invisible. On a May morning, the sunlight streamed through the transparent glass of the building that once bore the name of Brightwell Enterprises. That name had disappeared without a trace, replaced by a new inscription, etched deeply into a shiny brass plaque affixed to the front entrance. Cole Center for Innovation. A place to begin again. Today marked exactly 1 year since Evelyn Carter was kicked out of this very place for her skin color, her age, and for wearing a plain gray sweater with no famous logo. And exactly 1 year later she returned, not as someone knocking at the door, but as the one holding the keys to the entire building. Evelyn walked slowly through the familiar lobby, the place where there used to be skeptical glances, hands that held her back with a suppressive attitude, and words echoed from prejudice. Now. Only the sound of children's shoes running past in light blue uniforms, their eyes shining with excitement, and their voices echoing, "Hey, this code runs now. Did you add the conflict check? Otherwise the server might crash. Next Friday, we're visiting Carter Innovations, right?" The entire space seemed to have been reprogrammed, not through technology, but through a new spirit. Evelyn stood still in the lobby. No tears, no condemnation of the past. She only smiled, a quiet, enduring smile, just like her life. On the 3rd floor, where the former Brightwell Executive Meeting Room had been, now transformed into the Innovation Lab, an open space with over 40 high-performance computers, virtual reality equipment, and digital boards for group algorithm programming. At the back of the room, Vanessa Lewis, now the National Director of the Cole Center, was guiding a group of 11th grade girls in designing a user behavior analysis algorithm that doesn't collect personal data. "We're not just learning technology," she said. "We're learning how to hold ethics in the hands of code. That's how you change the world." The atmosphere of the Cole Center felt nothing like a traditional educational institution. It resembled an incubator, a place where seeds that had been cast out from fertile soil were now nurtured with trust and knowledge. The first batch of students had already achieved incredible results. 6 students secured internships at Carter Innovations. 3 small startup groups received funding from angel investors. One student, Malik Foster, 17, was invited by NASA to join their Young AI Technician Training Program. All of these names, if they had stayed outside, would have likely been filtered out in the very first step due to attending underfunded schools or lacking sufficient extracurricular activities. But now, they didn't need to pass through someone else's gate to prove themselves. They were opening their own doors. In the glass-walled office overlooking the main lobby, Evelyn welcomed a group of federal lawmakers who came to survey the center's model. She introduced them without fanfare, simply taking the guests on a tour, stopping by classrooms and listening as students presented their startup ideas for a school violence alert system using decentralized data. One of the lawmakers, who had previously opposed federal funding for centers like Cole, stood silently for a long time. After the tour, he quietly said, "I was wrong. This model is the future of America." Evelyn simply responded, "I don't ask anyone to apologize. I just want them to change." Down in the lobby, a group of first-year students were taking commemorative photos in front of the center's entrance. One of them, Jada, held up her phone, recording a short video. Back then, she got kicked out of here just because she didn't look like a real CEO. And now, we call this place home. She raised the camera to capture the entire building. A place that once pushed talent out is now the shelter for a generation creating the future. Across the city, in an old apartment near the train station, Ashley Monroe was folding her uniform for the night shift. Every evening, she sat behind a screen, receiving hundreds of calls from frustrated customers, replying with a scripted response. No one called her Tough Receptionist Ashley anymore as they had a year ago. Now, that name was only associated with a moral lesson in many MBA programs' corporate ethics curricula. Small actions, big consequences. She once said, "This is not a social services center." And now, she had to ask for a job at a place where her dream was reduced to $14.50 per hour. A year had passed. Brightwell was no more. Evelyn did not seek revenge, but life had sprouted from the very place once covered in prejudice. On a May morning, the bell signaling the end of class rang gently through the ceiling speakers. The students in the Building Ethical AI Systems course hurried to pack up their laptops and notebooks, preparing for the special talk that the center had announced a week prior. In the large auditorium on the 4th floor, once the high-level seminar room of Brightwell, there were no ties, no PowerPoint presentations, no business strategy charts. Only a woman in a simple gray blazer sitting in front of hundreds of students of color, children of workers, farmers, and immigrants. She was Evelyn Carter. And she didn't need an introduction. As the lights dimmed and everyone settled into their seats, Evelyn stood up. She didn't walk up to the podium meant for speakers. She walked down the aisles between the rows of students, walking among them like a teacher, not a CEO. She paused in the middle of the room, turned around, and her calm voice resonated. No microphone, no need to convince. You ask me, what was the biggest obstacle in building Carter Innovations? The answer is not money, not technology, and not politics. She looked around the room. The biggest obstacle is invisibility. It's when you walk into a room and people don't see you. Not because you aren't good enough, but because their eyes aren't programmed to see people like you. A student in the front row nodded gently, as if recalling the time they had been passed over for a scholarship interview simply because they were not leadership material. Evelyn continued, her voice growing quieter but sharper than ever. And then someone will tell you, try twice as hard to be treated almost fairly. Sounds reasonable, right? But no, that's a cognitive trap. Because when you push all your energy just to be seen, they're still setting up systems to keep not seeing you. The entire auditorium fell silent. The atmosphere wasn't heavy, but felt like a wave of awareness passing through every row of seats. Evelyn slowly walked back toward the podium, placing her hand on the cold wood and said, "But there's something they don't know. When they underestimate you, they won't prepare for you. And that's when you'll appear like a flood they never had time to build a dam for." The auditorium erupted in silent applause. No loud clapping. Just wide eyes, pens softly touching paper, and hearts beginning to redefine what strength really means. At lunch, a group of students gathered in the courtyard, each carrying a quote from Evelyn's speech. One boy quietly said, "She doesn't need to shout. She doesn't need anyone's permission. She just showed up. And now the whole world has to listen." Later that afternoon, Vanessa Lewis was reviewing the expansion plan for the Cole Center to Chicago and Houston. She paused for a moment, stepping out onto the 7th-floor balcony, looking down at the playground below, where children were drawing neural network diagrams on the concrete with colored chalk. A colleague came up beside her, whispering, "You know, Evelyn was once thrown out of this building by Ashley with no help. Now, though," Vanessa replied without taking her eyes off the playground, "now she teaches a whole generation how to walk in, without needing a door to be opened." That evening, in a quiet office, Evelyn handwrote a letter. She didn't send it. She didn't sign it. Just a few lines. "I used to think that to be heard, I had to speak loudly. But after everything, I realized true power never had to raise its voice." She folded the letter and placed it in a drawer next to an old photo frame, a picture of her mother, a black woman who couldn't read, who once held her daughter's hand and said, "If they won't give you a seat, bring your own chair." Evelyn had brought that chair. And then she built a whole building around it. When Evelyn folded the letter she hadn't sent, the sky over New York had already darkened. The lights from the floors of the Cole Center for Innovation gradually turned on, like stars rising from the very ruins of the past. 1 year ago, this place had been a symbol of hierarchy, arrogance, and silent nods to injustice. Now it was the launchpad for a generation that had never been seen the right way. And Brightwell, a name that had once dominated the technology rankings, now only existed in modern history classrooms as a living example of what happens when a company places reputation above integrity. But strangely, that collapse left no ashes. It left a seed of life. Just 18 months after the incident at the Brightwell lobby, more than 17 centers named after Evelyn Carter were established in major cities across the United States. From Chicago, Houston, Oakland, to Detroit, Philadelphia, and Charlotte. Not a single center was funded by the government, but by private funds, awakened businesses, and especially individuals who had once remained silent. The name Evelyn Carter was no longer just a name. It became a living reminder that respect is not a privilege granted to the respected. It is a mandatory responsibility for those in power, and if power ignores this, consequences will come. Not through protests, not through violence, but through strategic actions. At an international technology seminar in Geneva, when a representative from a large tech company asked Evelyn, "What do you think caused the entire ecosystem to shift because of one incident?" she simply smiled softly. It didn't start with the incident. It started with how people stayed silent in the face of that incident. And then, everyone paid the price. The change didn't stop with students. It spread across all the major tech companies. Over 40 Fortune 500 companies changed their hiring policies, eliminating biased algorithms that excluded minorities. An alliance called No More Silent Lobbies was formed, forcing companies to publicly disclose their processes for handling discrimination complaints. The U.S. Department of Labor announced a new standard for inclusive organizational culture, with the call center recognized as the national reference model. Meanwhile, Richard Lawson, once the CEO of Brightwell, lived in seclusion in Colorado, no longer appearing in public. He had sent a handwritten letter asking to meet Evelyn to talk like two grown-ups. Evelyn read it, then silently chose not to reply. Not because of hatred, but because the matter no longer needed an apology. It needed action, which he had never taken. Mark Reynolds was released from prison after 3 years, with a reputation beyond repair. No company dared to rehire him. He opened a small consulting firm but had no clients. In a brief interview, he said, "I once thought silence was a form of wisdom. Now I know sometimes silence is complicity." Ashley Monroe, although no longer living under public outrage, could not escape the shadow she had cast. She abandoned her intention to sue, after being rejected by the court for lack of evidence of harm beyond the consequences she herself caused. She worked 2 jobs, during the day as a short-term administrative contractor, at night as a customer service assistant. Every time she received a call from a complaining customer, she clearly heard her own voice, "I'm sorry, I'll check it out." And not once did she fail to hear the phrase from someone else, "This voice sounds like the one from a help center." She didn't respond. She stayed silent. Just like everyone had stayed silent when she first began to act that way. And amidst all these whirlwinds, the call center continued to function as a light in the storm. Not loud, not noisy, but bright. In a year-end speech, Evelyn closed with a line that made the entire audience stand and applaud. "Remember this. When you aren't invited to sit at the table, don't just bring a chair. Bring the blueprint for the entire room." That was how she turned ruin into legacy. Not through fire, but through light. From a cold hallway where a woman was pushed out because of prejudice, to a network of training centers spreading across the United States, the story of Evelyn Carter was not just the journey of one individual, but a roadmap for a society that was relearning how to see people. The receptionist, who once thought she was following procedure, forgot that a procedure without ethics creates injustice. The executives who had stayed silent, thinking it was safe, were ultimately swept away by that very silence. And a 58-year-old black woman, dismissed for her simple appearance, proved that true power doesn't need shouting. It needs steadfastness. What about you? If you were the one behind the reception desk that day, would you have done things differently? If this story made you reflect, please like the video, share it with your friends, and subscribe to the channel so you don't miss the next stories, where those once underestimated will have the final word. Thank you for watching.